Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to this episode of Reflections in Faith, where we delve into profound issues through the lens of Islam. Today we are exploring a very sensitive and critical topic, societal norms and their impact on women, particularly within the Western context. This episode includes an insightful recorded conversation between two radio hosts in a local radio station, Sarah and James, who share their thoughts on a personal account written by journalist Kate Spicer recently on Perth Now. Spicer bravely recounts her experiences with societal pressures, alcohol, and the vulnerabilities women face every day. Sarah and James offer contrasting perspectives on these issues, weaving in discussions about generational shifts, consent, and respect. This conversation will challenge us to reflect on the values shaping our lives and the lessons we can draw from Islamic teachings to create a safer and more dignified environment for everyone. Please note, the content may be sensitive for some listeners, so discretion is advised. Let's listen in to this dialogue, and afterward, I'll return with concluding thoughts to tie it all in together and share my reflections on this important topic.
All right, so let's dive into this deep dive. This is a topic that you flag as super intriguing, societal norms, particularly how they impact women. It's one of those things that I think is always kind of swirling around us.
Yeah.
But we rarely stop to really examine it. And honestly, after reading this article by Kate Spicer, I'm kind of floored by how much we just accept as normal.
Yeah. It's fascinating how these societal norms become so ingrained that we rarely question them, even when they might be harmful.
Exactly. And Spicer's piece is brutally honest. She recounts her own experiences with these non-consensual encounters.
Yeah.
Especially those fueled by alcohol. And it really makes you think, how many women have similar stories, but they've just internalize them, brush them off as part of life.
Yeah, and her use of the phrase walk of shame is particularly striking. I think it highlights this expectation for women to feel ashamed after a casual sexual encounter, even if they felt pressured or uncomfortable.
It's like the shame is built into the language itself.
Right.
And it's interesting that Spicer says she often felt this pressure to act confident after a one-night stand, even if she felt anything but.
Yeah. And that speaks volumes about the power dynamics at play. I think it suggests that women's worth is often tied to their perceived sexual desirability and their ability to conform to certain societal expectations.
Absolutely. And she's not alone, right? He quotes Emily Attack, who talks about waking up after nights out, feeling like she hadn't consented to what happened. And it's chilling because they both admit they didn't even realize something was wrong at the time.
Yeah, and this normalization of these experiences is what's so insidious. It's like this collective blind spot. That prevents us from seeing the potential harm and exploitation that can exist even within seemingly consensual encounters.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how much alcohol plays into this. Spicer points out that 50 to 75% of sexual assaults involve alcohol.
Alcohol definitely blurs the lines of consent.
Yeah.
It lowers inhibitions, impairs judgment, and can make it difficult to clearly communicate or understand boundaries. And that creates a dangerous situation, especially for women who are often targeted or pressured while intoxicated.
Right. And this is where I think the generational difference Spicer highlights is so interesting. She talks about how she and her friends often internalize the blame for these experiences, but their daughters are growing up with a greater awareness of consent and boundaries.
That's a positive shift. But it begs the question, why did it take so long for these conversations to happen openly? What's changing now?
Well, I mean, the #MeToo movement certainly brought these issues to the forefront.
Right.
And there's been a growing push for better sex education. That includes discussions about consent, healthy relationships, and recognizing red flags.
Yes. These are all important factors. And we're seeing legal changes as well. Spicer mentions affirmative consent laws in countries like Spain, Sweden, and Denmark, which require clear, enthusiastic agreement for sexual activity.
It's like the burden shifting from the victim having to prove they said no to requiring clear evidence of a yes. That feels like a big step in the right direction.
It is. But even with these positive developments, Spicer acknowledges the harsh reality that most sexual assault cases never result in charges or convictions.
It's heartbreaking. Less than 10% of these crimes are even reported. And of those, only a tiny fraction lead to any legal action. It just shows how much work still needs to be done to support survivors and hold perpetrators accountable.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the other piece you shared, that Facebook post about raising families in Western societies as Muslims. It's fascinating how it contrasts with Spicer's experience, offering a different perspective on how societal norms can shape our understanding of sex, respect, and women's roles.
Yeah, the post really emphasizes these values of modesty, respect for women, and having clear boundaries within relationships, all of which feel starkly different from the culture Spicer describes.
What's interesting here is how this post highlights the role of religion in shaping those societal norms. It suggests that Islamic teachings offer a framework for navigating these complex issues, one that might be more protective, especially for women.
For example, the post mentions how Islam prohibits alcohol, which we know is so often a factor in situations like the one Spicer describes.
Right. By removing a major contributor to situations where consent is compromised, Islamic teachings aim to safeguard individuals from potential harm. It's about creating a culture where clarity and responsibility are paramount.
Right. And the post emphasizes that Islam places a high value on respecting and honoring women, both in words and in actions.
Right. It even quotes the Prophet Muhammad, saying that the best among people are those who are best to their women. And this statement reframes the entire conversation about how women should be viewed and treated in society. It's a stark contrast to the objectification and exploitation that Spicer experienced.
It makes me wonder, could Islamic teachings offer insights into how we might reshape societal norms in the West to better protect women and create a culture of genuine respect?
That's a really interesting question, and one we should definitely explore further.
Okay, so we've got these two perspectives. Spicer's firsthand account of the vulnerabilities created by current societal norms, and this Facebook post that presents a potential alternative grounded in Islamic teachings.
And what's emerging is a complex picture of how cultural values, religious beliefs, and societal expectations all intersect to shape our understanding of consent, respect, and the very nature of relationships.
It's a lot to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface. But before we dive deeper, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered so far.
Yeah, it is a lot to digest, and we've been laying out the problem, but it's equally important to think about solutions. Spicer's article touches on some efforts to change laws and policing practices, specifically in Britain.
Right, she mentions a push for these affirmative consent laws, which we talked about earlier. But I'm curious, how would something like that actually work in practice? Isn't it hard to prove, enthusiastic consent?
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about implementation. Some critics argue it's too subjective, too difficult to define in legal terms. But supporters like Dr. Charlotte Proudman, who's been, a strong advocate for legal reform, say it's about shifting the focus. Instead of putting the burden on the victim to prove they resisted, it requires clear evidence of a yes.
So it's more about changing the underlying assumptions about consent than about catching people out on technicalities.
Precisely. It sends a message that silence, passivity, especially under the influence of alcohol, does not equal consent.
Interesting.
Spicer also points out that police training is evolving too. There's this program, Operation Soteria, being rolled out in parts of England and Wales, which trains officers to better understand trauma and how it impacts victims' behavior.
That sounds promising. But Spicer also makes it clear that even with these changes, the legal system is still failing most victims. Those statistics she cites are just depressing.
Yes, they are. The vast majority of sexual assault cases never even get reported, and even fewer result in charges or convictions. It makes you wonder what's preventing survivors from coming forward.
I imagine it's a complex mix of things, fear of not being believed, the trauma of reliving the experience through a legal process. It's no wonder so many choose to stay silent.
And that silence perpetuates the cycle, doesn't it? It allows these harmful norms to persist because the problem remains largely invisible. That's why I find the Facebook post's emphasis on education so compelling. Could we prevent some of these situations by instilling values of respect and consent from an early age?
Yeah, that seems to be their argument. They call for, open conversations about these issues in homes, schools, communities. It's about modeling healthy behaviors and relationships so that young people grow up with a different understanding of what's acceptable.
It seems like Spicer's doing her part, too. She mentions having those tough conversations with her nieces and goddaughters, warning them about the dangers of alcohol and the importance of setting clear boundaries. It's not about scaring them, but about giving them the tools to protect themselves.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we live in a world where these dangers exist and equipping young people to navigate them safely.
Right.
So we've got legal reforms happening, more focus on education. It seems like a multi-pronged approach is necessary to really make a difference.
I agree. And while those efforts are crucial, there's also this deeper question we need to grapple with. Spicer brings up Andrea Dworkin, a feminist writer who argued that penetrative sex is inherently violent. And that's obviously a controversial statement, but it gets you thinking.
Yeah, it does, right? It's like,
Yeah.
are we just tinkering around the edges if we don't examine the very foundation
Mhm.
of how we think about sex and relationships? Are there power dynamics baked into the very act itself that we're not acknowledging?
Dworkin's work was often dismissed as extreme, but I think there's value in considering her critiques. Even if you don't agree with her conclusions, she forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, consent, and the potential for harm that exists within sexual relationships.
And Spicer seems to have come around to appreciating Dworkin's perspective later in life. She even suggests that the feminism light she embraced in her youth, which focused on sexual freedom without addressing underlying power imbalances, might have actually done more to benefit men than women.
That's a thought-provoking idea. It challenges the assumption that simply having the freedom to engage in the same behaviors as men equates to true equality. Maybe it requires a more radical rethinking of the system's instructions that perpetuate those imbalances.
And this is where I think the Facebook post's emphasis on Islamic teachings gets really interesting. It's not just about legal tweaks or educational programs. It's about a completely different set of cultural and religious values that might offer a more holistic approach to protecting women and fostering respect.
That's a great point. We've been focused on addressing the symptoms, but perhaps Islamic teachings offer a way to address the root causes of these issues by promoting a culture of modesty, respect, and responsibility from the ground up.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of drawing inspiration from different cultures and belief systems to find solutions to these challenges. It's like, what can we learn from each other? How can we combine the best of different perspectives to create a better world for everyone?
That's a powerful question to ponder, and it leads us to the heart of what this deep dive is all about. It's not just about analyzing articles and dissecting arguments. It's about using this knowledge to challenge our own assumptions, broaden our perspectives, and ultimately, to inspire action.
And on that note, I think we're ready to transition into the final part of our exploration. First, let's give our listeners a moment to digest all we've covered so far. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It feels like we've gone from the personal to the societal to the philosophical and back again.
Yeah, we certainly have. We started with Kate Spicer's raw account of her experiences, examined legal reforms and the limitations of the justice system, and even delved into some of those challenging critiques of societal norms around sex and relationships.
And woven through all of this is that Facebook post, offering a contrasting perspective rooted in Islamic teachings. It's almost like we're holding up these two mirrors to society, one reflecting the harsh realities that women face, and the other presenting a potential path toward a more, respectful and equitable future.
Yeah, it's a powerful juxtaposition, isn't it? On the one hand, we have Spicer's story, which, highlights the deeply ingrained misogyny and the normalization of harmful behaviors that can make women so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And on the other, we have these Islamic principles that emphasize modesty, respect for women, and the importance of clear boundaries within relationships.
It makes me wonder if the contrast itself holds a key insight. Is it possible that by moving away from the objectification of women that's so prevalent in most Western societies, we could actually create a safer and more fulfilling experience for everyone?
That's a profound question. And I think it gets to the heart of what we've been exploring. If we constantly view women through a lens of sexual desirability, it becomes difficult to see them as fully realized human beings deserving of respect and dignity.
It's like that objectification creates this distorted reality where consent becomes murky. Boundaries are easily crossed, and exploitation can thrive in the shadows.
Exactly. And that's where the Islamic perspective offers a different framework. By emphasizing the inherent worth of women not as objects, but as individuals with their own agency and autonomy,
Right.
it establishes a foundation of respect that can permeate all aspects of society.
It's not about suppressing sexuality or imposing rigid rules. It's about creating a culture where men and women can interact with each other as equals without the pressure of those ingrained societal expectations that often lead to, objectification and exploitation.
Precisely. And that shift in perspective has the potential to create a ripple effect, impacting everything from how we raise our children to how we structure our legal systems to how we define healthy relationships.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? What can you take away from this deep dive into societal norms and vulnerabilities?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. Pay attention to the messages you're receiving from society about women, about sex, about relationships. Question the assumptions that underpin those messages. Challenge the norms that perpetuate harm.
And don't be afraid to look beyond your own cultural bubble. We've seen how Islamic teachings offer a different lens through which to view these issues, and there are countless other perspectives out there that can enrich our understanding and challenge our preconceived notions.
It's about expanding our horizons, engaging in open and honest conversations, and ultimately taking action to create a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and empowered.
Beautifully said. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I know it's a lot to process, but if there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive, it's this. Don't let the conversation end here. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving to create a more just and equitable world for all.
Subhanallah, what a thought-provoking discussion that was between Sarah and James. They highlighted how societal norms can often blur boundaries and perpetuate harmful behaviors. And they question how generational shifts, changing perspectives on consent, can bring about positive change. Reflecting on this, I'm reminded of the immense wisdom in Islamic teachings, which emphasize protecting one's dignity and valuing clear boundaries in all relationships. The prohibition of intoxicants is one such example, serving as a safeguard not only for our physical well-being, but for our moral and social interactions. The prophetic saying, "The best of you are those who are best to their women," underlines the importance of respect and compassion as fundamental principles of our relationships. While societal norms in many places are shifting toward greater awareness and accountability, the Islamic framework has always prioritized the inherent dignity and respect of every individual. As Muslims, it's our responsibility to embody these values in our homes, in our communities, and in our broader societies. Let's reflect on how we can lead by example, challenging harmful norms and fostering environments of mutual respect and safety. And as we do so, let us hold firm to the guidance of the Quran and Sunnah, which offer solutions that are timeless and deeply humane. May Allah Azza wa Jal guide us to be agents of positive change, always upholding truth and compassion in all that we do. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Reflections in Faith, and until the next time, wa billahi tawfiq wal hidayah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.